Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, August 9th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 24 days. The game against Michigan in 108 days. We're going to be talking safeties today. We're going to be talking defense today, and we're going to be doing it with our good buddy, Ross Fulton of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He is our X's and O's guru, everyone's smart football friend. And this is something that, we talked to the safeties and Perry Eliano at after practice on Tuesday, so this is kind of the topic du jour, and it's also a topic I wanted to kind of get into because it feels like we maybe are not seeing exactly what we were expecting on the back end of the Ohio State defense this fall, so I wanted to talk to Ross about maybe some of the whys behind that. Ross, I guess let's start with a real quick 101, and this, you don't need to go super deep here, but just a real quick 101 level conversation about there are three safety spots in this Ohio State defense: the nickel, the bandit or boundary safety, and the adjuster or deep safety. Can you just kind of give everyone a very 101 level look at the primary job responsibilities of those three different spots?
Yeah, so again, you kind of described it there. You have three safeties. Knowles sets his back seven to the field or the wide side, right? So the nickel is always going to be to the wide side of the field. The adjuster or deep field safety is going to be between them, and the boundary safety is going to be to the boundary, or the bandit, I guess. The concept of using the three safeties is that it makes it easier to handle shifts and motions. And, if the offense goes from, sends their slot receiver from the wide side of the field to the short side, I know some people can see me, but you basically just kind of rotate, right? You kind of, it's like an umbrella kind of moving. And so that means you don't have to chase motion. You don't get out leveraged. That said, all three of those positions do need to be able to do a little bit of what the others do, because there will be times where they're called on, to play deep, to play in the slot, etc. But based on the premise that most of the times, like in a modern 11 personnel offense with three wide receivers, a tight end, and a running back, an offense will tend to set its passing strength to the field, meaning their slot receiver is in the slot to the field. And the result of that is the nickel will tend to be over the slot receiver more often than not. And the bandit or boundary will tend to be to the tight end side more often than not. And so that results in the, for instance, if you're playing cover one man, that would mean the nickel would have to cover the slot receiver and the bandit would cover the tight end. But it also results in run fits, right? Because if you're the slots to the field and the tight ends to the boundary, your run strength as an offense is to the boundary. So it tends to put more of an onus on then the boundary safety to have a run gap that he has to fill to the short side of the field, where the nickel does not. But again, that can all flip easily, because if the offense doesn't do that, puts their slot to the boundary, their tight end of the field, now those jobs are basically reversed. And so the most infamous example of that, I guess, is when Lathan Ransom slips against Georgia. That was their slot receiver into the short side of the field. So now you have the bandit or the boundary safety has that slot and man coverage. Now the nickel can be in the fit. And then, if you're doing split safeties, that changes everything again. So again, there's sort of the nickel and the boundary in particular are sort of shades of gray of each other.
So I guess I was not expecting what we saw week one of fall practice. My assumption kind of going into the fall, based on what we saw some this spring, and we didn't get to see a ton of Jahad Carter this spring because he had that knee injury about halfway through the spring, and then all of a sudden we didn't see him anymore. So my assumption was, and I think this is true of other people, you're going to see Jahad Carter at the nickel spot and Sonny Styles maybe at that bandit spot, which, as you mentioned, is maybe a little bit more of a run-focused role. That it seemed like that made sense, probably. And then they come out week one, day one of camp, and Sonny Styles is at nickel. So what the heck? Why make that change? What's the thinking there behind that change? And is that something that makes sense to you?
So it's a change and not a change, right? Because if you go back and put on the spring game, there's lots of clips of Sonny Styles playing nickel. In fact, you can find clips of him playing man against Marvin Harrison in the slot. So And if you go back to the Georgia game, that's where Sonny Styles played, 20 or so odd snaps. So when Georgia was in 2 tight end personnel, which is, was a big chunk of what they did, Styles came in for Tanner McAllister at the field nickel. It is a change in the sense that otherwise he was the second team bandit, boundary safety to Lathan Ransom. I do think that Styles' skill set does generally suggest him being a boundary safety, but they obviously really like Lathan Ransom at that position. Like, they haven't moved him there ever. I think he also fits that role well. Like, he comes downhill very well. He does have the capability to play man coverage. He covered Brock Bowers really well against Georgia. So if you there's platonic ideals are in theory, right? But also you have to get your best 11 on the field. So like, if you want Lathan Ransom there and you think Sonny Styles should be on the field, it's like, where's the next best fit? Like a nickel, as we've seen, like, right? Like that's sort of the place where you can substitute based on personnel. Like Ohio State, when they played run heavy teams last year, would sometimes put a third linebacker there instead. And so like, it reminds me a little bit, Styles is a little bit like under Jim Keycock, where they used a 4-2-5 in that star position with like Hines or Tyler Moeller. Like those guys were that same, like to the field, I call it like a field apex. Like, so you're sort of splitting you're outside the tackle box, but inside the outside receiver. And you're sort of like a safety, almost late linebacker, like hybrid. Don Brown did it with Jabril Peppers. So it's not like there's, it's, been around for a while that you can also put a type like that there. I think it just begs the question then of like, how much can Styles handle in coverage versus a slot receiver? And, off of that then becomes like, how situational does it become playing him in that role versus a Cameron Martinez or even a corner?
And they've talked about having guys be flexible and be able to be in different spots. Jahad Carter talked about that during interviews on Tuesday. Sonny Styles talked a little bit about that as well. And that's something we've heard a little bit about from Jim Knowles in the past. When you're trying to you mentioned getting, the best 11 on the field, how do you, if you have concerns, with Sonny Styles, and I don't know how much, how legitimate the concerns are in terms of him being able to keep up with the short, shifty slot receiver who he may be tasked with covering as a nickel. How do you balance, having your best 3 safeties out there if you're worried about, either a specific matchup like that or guys getting rotated around and then, the boundary safety gets put in that spot? If there's someone who is better at one element of this, one guy's much better in run support, for example. How do you balance that with a guy who may not be as good in a different element? How do you, is that a situational package kind of thing where you're subbing guys in and out, or how do you balance having the best 11 in whatever kind of situation you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all trade-offs, right? Like you're trading off being a, master of all trades, jack of none, or whatever the saying is, versus, a specialist. So for instance, as I said, like Lathan Ransom, like he's pretty good in man coverage, but he's also pretty good at coming downhill and filling a run gap. And so with Styles, again, like we all sort of need to see it, like how much he can handle in man coverage. I mean, Jim Knowles says he can, we'll see to the extent, but like you definitely get the opportunity for that nickel to be part of the run fit if you want to. It gives you a lot of flexibility in what you're doing with him in there. Obviously they don't play man all the time. They do say they want to rely on man. They want to rely on, cover 3 match principles. So there are some zone elements as well, but then, the more he can handle, the better. I think increasingly you see teams going back to using more 2 tight ends, even if one of those tight ends is more of a, Brock Bowers-esque kind of flex tight end. So maybe that sort of brings back that, what's old is new again, that hybrid player that we were just talking about from 15 years ago. But, like Western Kentucky will be a good litmus test for a lot of this in terms of what they think they can do, because they spread out. They have a very good small, slot receiver. And so I think that'll be, give us some of a tell. But again, it's like, you have to also weigh, as you said, like, even if man coverage isn't Styles' for best attribute versus a 5'10" slot receiver, like, what are you giving up by taking him off the field and who you're putting in versus like, or do you just work around it and play more zone and, do other things?
All right. So that's something I'm right there with you. I'm super interested to see what that looks like when he's put in that spot. And we are not probably honestly going to know until you get a little bit into the season. So before I let you go, I did want to ask you one more thing. And that was about a conversation I had with Devin Radcliffe on a show at the end of last week. He talked about, the relative simplicity of the Ohio State defense. And you can go back and listen to that show. I think that dropped on Thursday or Friday last week. But wanted to see if you thought, if you kind of broadly agreed with that idea that Ohio State's defense is a little more simple or basic, however you want to talk, compared to Alabama or Michigan or defenses like that. And if so, is that something that is, one, an issue, and two, something you expect to maybe change a little bit this year as they head into year 2 of the Jim Knowles era?
Yeah, I mean, what's one of my responses to Devin, to take a deep breath, Devin, is, well, we got to see where things are this season, right? I mean, one season is not a huge sample size to draw upon. I will say I get where Devin's coming from in the sense that at least last year, and as it seems like the spring game, like, Ohio State under Ryan Day has always, and frankly Urban Meyer too, but on defense has always wanted to have every gap covered. So they want to gap everything out. So you have one player for each offensive run gap. That has not been the trend. If for those out there that, for instance, like to follow, like football Twitter folks, that is certainly not the sexy way to play defense right now. I would say it's like, light box. You want to like seal back a half a gap. You want to play games on the backside to, reduce splits so that you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, with defending the pass first and then still have ways to defend the run. So I would say what Ohio State's doing is a bit more old school, if you will, or at least that's what they have been doing. That said, I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder to some extent. I mean, there are advantages, right? Like, in theory, like, if you're gapped out, teams should not be able to run the football against you. And like, this does actually get back to like the Styles point too. Like, if he's a nickel, they should be very difficult to run against. And like, if you have everything gapped out, like I just saw, there was a post the other day from the Browns from the Hall of Fame game, and Jim Schwartz having an 8-man box with every gap covered and cover 3 behind it. Like, there's a reason like that concept has not gone away in a long time in football. Like, it still has its place. So, and like, I do think the other thing, to Devin's point, that I would agree with about Knowles, especially last year, is like, and we've talked about this, like, there weren't a lot of like simulated pressures in different ways. It was a lot of like, either we're going to bring like a heavy 6 or 7-man blitz, maybe drop someone in a cover 0, or we're going to bring like a 4-down rush. And there wasn't a lot of like 5 or 4-man pressures from different directions with like a, cover 2 zone blitz behind it. But again, like I'm willing to like, let's see how that plays out this year. And like, it's just hard to say how much of that was just first year versus they don't want to do it for X, Y, or Z reasons, and maybe they won't do it this year because they think they can generate a pass rush with their front four without it. So I get where Devin's coming from, but where I would probably disagree with Devin is just because it's probably not, the trendiest way to do things. I disagree that it means you can't have an effective defense by being more traditional in how you're doing it.
Well, we will all be watching the Jim Knowles defense in year 2 this year. It is going to be one of the big storylines we're following at BuckeyeHuddle.com. It's going to be one of those things that determines exactly how far this year's Ohio State team might be able to go, because if that defense is significantly better, oh boy, the sky might be the limit, because the offense should be pretty good probably, and we'll probably talk about the offense with Ross on an upcoming show at some point, because I have questions about the offensive line too, but we'll get there. We'll get there in another week or so. But we are indeed heading into Ross Fulton season. He is a regular contributor at BuckeyeHuddle.com, writes pretty much every week recapping the previous game, interesting schematic stuff that he's seen, why they're doing it, what it means. So he is a frequent guest on this show as well during the fall, so you have that to look forward to. But if you want to become a smarter football fan and talk to Ross and Devin and Justin and Mikey and all of our X's and O's guys, you can do that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. They are all on the Huddle board. They are, and there's an active thread talking about some of the scheme stuff that's going on, and they will frequently be there answering questions and making you a smarter football fan. So that is just one of the many benefits of membership at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We are heading into the busy season, and if you have thought about becoming a member, this seems like this would be a great time because fall camp coming up, some big recruiting decisions coming up. Should be a pretty interesting fall at Buckeye Huddle and in Columbus. So sign up today and make sure you're also subscribed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. And also all of our podcasts, wherever you get podcasts, you can find ours. Just search for Buckeye Huddle wherever you get them, and you can subscribe right there. We would also appreciate a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.